Another new year was approaching, and everyone was getting ready to go visit guests and close relatives. The Lee family had a long-standing tradition of celebrating the holiday every year at their grandparents' in another city. So the main character, 18-year-old Lucas, with his two sisters and parents, was in a hurry to leave his home. But no one expected that this journey would be fatal. The station was greeted by a large crowd of passengers. The young man barely kept up with his family so as not to get lost in the huge building among a large number of strangers. Unexpectedly for winter, there were many mosquitoes on the street and in the building. The flying bloodsuckers swooped down on their victims. One of the young men felt a prick on his neck. The mosquito bit and actively sucked blood. Along with the red blood cells, small but very dangerous viruses actively rushed through the arteries of the bitten person. The man was surprised to feel that the skin on his face was beginning to tear apart. The flying insect has done its insidious work. Harmful cells have already entered the human body and have begun to multiply at lightning speed, taking over the body of the new host. Trying to drive away the annoying mosquito, the passenger hurried to get on the train. Little Bob was leading his 70-year-old blind grandfather onto the platform, discussing with him the large amount of negative energy around them. Old Bruce was worried that if he died, who would look after his precocious grandson? People started bustling about, and boarding was announced for the passenger train X-47, which travels across almost half the country with all the stops. The crowd sped up to get good seats. The head of the family's wife, 40-year-old Kate, grumbled at her husband, accusing him of buying tickets for the oldest, slowest train with seats in order to save money. Helen, Lucas's younger twin, a rebel and music lover who dropped out of university for the sake of music, also tried unsuccessfully to dissuade her father from this idea. She did not like long trips. Dennis himself was carrying a large bag and was happy that he had managed to get tickets before the holiday, especially since he didn't have money for expensive seats for a large family. The wife constantly scolded her husband for not looking for work and for engaging in various useless, in her opinion, handicrafts that did not provide for the needs of the family. Dennis could not get used to the constant family squabbles and his wife's screams. The eldest daughter tried to calm her mother down. The girl was also tired of the constant squabbles in the family. Haley Lee was a 22-year-old, straight-A student with great promise, but she became pregnant in her third year of medical school, so she had to put her studies on hold. The sisters began to quarrel again. The younger ones supported their mother, scolding their father for earning little and sending all the money to his distant relatives. The older one tried to support the head of the family. Then Haley turned her attention to her brother, scolding him for being slow. He was always walking behind everyone else. Lucas really tried to stay away from the loud relatives, feeling like he was in a bazaar. The young man was very sickly since childhood and constantly caught all sorts of infections. Even now, the boy was bothered by a high temperature and dizziness, but he tried not to lag too far behind his relatives. The main character reflected on the fact that his entire family consisted of nothing but losers. Even his mother was always dissatisfied with everything and thought only about money. Lucas lived on medication. His health condition did not allow him to enter university. Now he was considered a disgrace to the whole family and a repeater. Suddenly, the young man's gaze noticed something unusual in the crowd. The main character noticed the slender silhouette and beautiful clothes of the girl walking in front of him. This was his ideal. Suddenly, a man's hand roughly reached out to the beauty. The impudent young man was already licking his lips in anticipation. The man managed to brazenly grab the girl by the buttocks. The stranger screamed in surprise and looked around. Lucas was very close and didn't know what to do. The beauty thought that the guy who was closest touched her on purpose. The girl called the main character a dirty pervert. The stranger swung and hit the young man in the face with all her might. The unexpected attack left Lucas unable to stay on his feet. The beauty stood nearby, not understanding how this decent-looking young man could allow himself to commit such an indecent act. The main character stood up. His cheek hurt a lot. He didn't have time to explain anything as the girl ran away with tears in her eyes. Lucas felt like a complete failure again. A minute later, the young man heard cries for help from the next room and rushed there. The young man saw that some man was tightly hugging a resisting beauty. The guy recognized the same impudent fellow who had already caused him to get slapped. The main character ran closer to the girl. Police officers were already rushing to help. The police had been following the pervert for a long time, and this time they managed to detain him. The surrounding area was surprised by the excellent work of the law enforcement officers, who immediately responded to the cries for help. One of the employees inquired about the girl's condition and offered to take her to the hospital after seeing blood on her. The criminal tried to bite the stranger and tore off the skin on her neck. Meg was rushing to the train and refused to go to the hospital, thanking her saviors. The police put handcuffs on the bandit and took him to the station. Lucas also decided to take revenge on the impudent guy for his pain and post the video on the internet. The main character filmed a video of the captured pervert from around the corner. Something alerted the young man, and he looked through the footage. On the screen, the criminal's head suddenly turned the other way, a glaring gaze looking straight from behind. The stranger's appearance was terrifying. He didn't look guilty at all. Lucas was scared. He didn't understand what was happening. The young man looked again at the departing police officers, leading the captured hooligan away by the arms, and did not notice anything unusual. The main character thought that his body temperature had risen again and that he was hallucinating. The train was already approaching its platform. The Lee family hurried to find a carriage. The departure announcement was due soon. Dennis had a hard time packing all the things into the luggage racks. The head of the family went with his wife to the next carriage to their seats, ordering the children to watch their bags. Suddenly, Lucas received a blow to the leg. Bob tried to get to his seats with his grandfather, pushing everyone aside. The boy didn't like his neighbor in the carriage, who gave off an air of bad luck. Bruce tried to calm his grandson down, condemning him for his statements. Due to his vision problem, he had long since learned to identify a person by the bones of his skull. The old man felt the bright energy and wonderful destiny that awaited the main character. The young man did not believe the stranger's words at all. The old man suddenly became agitated. He wanted to leave the train immediately, but the carriages had already moved off. Bruce could not believe his prophetic thoughts. Citing his age and hoping that he was mistaken, he saw that all the people here had to die. Bob was already treating Helen, who was dressed in a cool rocker jacket, to some candy. Lucas's younger sister thanked the little boy, noting that he has good taste. After some time, the main character was disturbed by a female voice asking him to move over. The young man raised his head to look at his fellow traveler. A beauty he already knew was standing next to him, showing her ticket for the next seat. Lucas was surprised. It was this girl that the pervert was harassing at the station. The bandage on Meg's neck was soaked with blood. At this time, strange events were taking place at the police station. The criminal was able to easily remove the handcuffs and jump onto the ceiling, his eyes flashing furiously. A minute later, the stranger left the station, leaving the bodies of the police officers there. At that time, no one knew that the man who was bitten by a mosquito had turned into a mutant, and he was rushing to find new victims. A huge number of winged midges were already circling over the city, spreading an unknown type of virus. People at the station were waving away the annoying insects, and rumors were already spreading about a madman who was biting everyone. An endless swarm of mosquitoes flew around the cities and accompanied the fatal train. The main character switched off for a moment. He stood opposite the pervert in an empty room. The stranger easily twisted his neck in all directions and turned his head from front to back. Then the monster opened its mouth, and many winged insects flew out. Mosquitoes attacked Lucas from all sides. The young man sweated with horror and opened his eyes, realizing that it was a terrible dream. The protagonist sat in confusion until Meg asked to let her out. The veins on the beauty's neck bulged and pulsated violently. Lucas was scared. The girl was emitting a completely different energy than before. The young man watched his fellow traveler with apprehension. Helen noticed her brother's attentive gaze and noted out loud that he did not have very good taste. Little Bob brazenly settled down on his new friend's lap and slept soundly. In the neighboring seats, men were discussing work matters. One of them asked his boss to pay him his salary so that he could buy medicine for his sick mother. The boss didn't believe Henry's words, promising to return the money he had earned the following year. The boss and his assistant went off to have some fun, not paying any attention to his upset subordinate. The young man watched the happy couple with tears in his eyes when a stranger approached him. The unknown person took the guy by the shoulder and offered to take revenge and kill the offender. Henry looked at his interlocutor with fear, afraid that he was dealing with a madman. It was time for lunch, and the barmaid was moving around the carriages with a cart, offering food and drinks. The protagonist stood up to let the conductor through and noticed a familiar face. Lucas still remembered the slap. The beauty was sitting nearby and listening to music, not paying attention to anyone. The young man decided to leave quickly so as not to get into any trouble again. The young man went out into the vestibule to get some water. A familiar voice made the guy hide. Mom was talking to an unknown man. He asked her about divorce and promised to help his son get into school. The stranger held Kate's hand tenderly. Lucas didn't understand what was going on and why there was talk of divorce. The young man remembered that he had met this man with his mother before. The young man did not know what to do and was afraid of being discovered. The train arrived at the next station on schedule. It quickly got dark, as it was winter outside and snowing. The stop was short, so the conductor did not open the carriage, which was already full. The train started moving. No one noticed the girl outside the window, who was begging to be let in and asking for help. Hundreds of mutilated hands reached out to the unfortunate woman. A few moments later, the girl's body fell into the hands of the monsters. Numerous mutants managed to catch another victim. The train continued moving along its route. Video filming was taking place in one of the carriages. The young blogger was reporting live in her chat. Anna talked about her impressions of the trip and her neighbors in the carriage. A girl approached one of her fellow travelers to interview him. A group of fans actively shared comments online, discussing whether this was a real recording or a staged production, and some were interested in the man in the background in black makeup. Fellow travelers also began to pay attention to the strange stranger. Anna continued to question her interlocutor. After some time, strange sounds were heard from behind, which attracted everyone's attention. The strange stranger looked terrifying and began to attack those around him. Those present in the carriage were frightened and tried to escape. The chat was amazed at the realism of the production, and comments flew one after another. The audience could not recognize the actors and suggested rewarding them for their performance. The train continued moving to the next station. Dennis went out into the corridor where one of the passengers was already, and the men started talking. Mason offered his fellow traveler a cigarette, but the head of the family had long since quit smoking and was specifically chewing on a reed. Dennis carried a huge bag with him at all times, telling his interlocutor that it contained his most valuable things. A female voice from behind asked the men for a lighter. The father was angry when he saw his youngest daughter with a cigarette in her hand. The girl responded by promising to tell her mother that the head of the family had started smoking again. The older sister came out in time to protect her father and stopped Helen. She had been watching her for a long time. The girl didn't think to justify herself. She had recently been friends with hooligans and carried a guitar everywhere, composing her own music. Having quarreled, the sisters went their separate ways, leaving the astonished men behind. Mason calmed the upset head of the family, saying that he had rarely had such fun in his life. Dennis remembered his son, who was much calmer than his daughters. At that moment, Lucas happened to be passing by and recognized his father. The main character felt like there was always some green thing on the elder Lee's head, and he always got into trouble. Dennis introduced his son to his interlocutor, who pretended not to notice anyone and quickly left. The young man was still under the impression of his mother's conversation with her suitor. Lucas didn't know how to act, realizing that the family was coming to an end. A sign on the sanitary room said it was occupied, and strange sounds were coming from there. The door suddenly swung open, and two people were doing something incomprehensible in the room. Lucas was surprised to recognize the girl who was on top of the strange man as his neighbor with the wound on her neck. Feeling someone's gaze, the beauty looked back, a glowing eye peeking out from a shock of long hair. Meg had changed beyond recognition. Blood was oozing from her mouth, and a broken gadget was sticking out of her head. The monster looked at its next potential victim. A moment later, the monster was next to the main character, ready to grab hold of him. Lucas didn't have time to react and fell under the pressure of the mutant, trying to resist. The ugly woman sank her teeth into the young man's hand. The young man felt the bite and continued to fight back with all his might. The railway police officers were patrolling the carriages and heard the screams. They tried to reprimand the excited girl. Dissatisfied with the interference, the mutant attacked new victims. The main character watched what was happening in a daze. Suddenly, the body of the man lying in the sanitary room arched and began to rise to his feet. The victim of the monster's bites was transformed before our eyes, turning into a mutant. Inflating like a bubble, the monster stood up and walked towards the exit. A weakened Lucas lay on the floor and watched in horror what was happening around him. The main character noticed that his body no longer obeyed him. Blood was oozing from the bite wound on his arm. The train passed over a long bridge, with a huge train of mutants trailing along the rails behind it. The monsters were arriving from all sides. Their target was the X-47 train with people traveling to visit relatives for the holiday. Meg easily dealt with the police and went in search of her next victims. A couple of village boys from the 10th carriage became interested in the unusual appearance of the beauty with a slender figure. They were not against flirting with her. However, when the girl came closer, the men became afraid. Without thinking, Meg sank her teeth into the neck of one of them. Those around could not understand what was happening in the carriage. The man could not free himself from the monster's clutches. Passengers watched in horror as the girl bit the man. Everyone was afraid to come closer. Many thought it was mad cow disease. A few minutes later, the victim of the attack stood up. The man's eyes were bloodshot. At this time, the girl had already attacked the next person. The rest tried to escape. All those who suffered from the bites almost immediately turned into the same monsters and began chasing people. The passengers called for help in horror, not knowing how to protect themselves from the attack. Many thought that they had simply gone crazy after seeing the terrible picture. The mutants absorbed the fellow travelers one by one. People rushed into neighboring carriages in panic. There was a tall man standing at the exit and not letting anyone out. The stranger's eyes glowed red with pleasure. A young employee of the Special Investigations Department, Taylor, managed to escape to warn her commander, who was riding in another carriage. The girl told Mason that in the next car everyone started biting each other and turning into mutants. It was quiet in the 7th carriage for now. The main character lay in the corridor, semi-conscious, next to a mountain of corpses. The bleeding stopped, but the young man felt that some kind of infection was penetrating his arteries. Lucas felt every cell of his body. The body gradually began to mutate. Terrible loud sounds began to be heard from all sides. The young man remembered how, as a child, everyone always called him a weakling, afraid of catching some disease from him. Nobody wanted to be friends with little Lucas, making fun of him like girls. The sisters were also unhappy that their brother was constantly missing school and could not do anything due to health problems. The father and mother were upset when their son failed to pass his school exams and did not get into university, having to repeat a year. Lucas grew up constantly being told that he was no good and had no future. All these voices were now sounding in his head from all sides. The main character realized that his short, worthless life was ending. Haley locked herself in the bathroom. She made a difficult decision. It was very important for her to hear her friend's opinion. The girl was stalling for time. She didn't want to go out into the carriage where there were a lot of strangers. At this time, one of the passengers tried to hide from the monsters that were catching up with her. Strange sounds and screams could be heard behind the door. Lucas's older sister left the room. The picture she saw amazed her. Haley thought that it was a festive masquerade. A man running past advised the girl to run quickly to escape from the madman. At the exit, the sister noticed her brother sitting on the floor unconscious. The girl thought that Lucas had fainted again, something that happened to him often. Ignoring the fleeing crowd, Haley rushed to her brother's aid. Having determined that there was no pulse, the medical student began performing indirect cardiac massage. However, the main character showed no signs of life at all. Something strange was happening in the carriage. Terrible, heart-rending screams were heard from everywhere. The sister didn't pay attention to anything. She was trying to help her younger brother. The girl did not stop performing resuscitation, begging the young man to wake up. The fatal train, accompanied by hordes of mosquitoes, continued moving. The detectives arrived at the car from which Taylor had escaped. It was necessary to gather all the people and isolate them in one place. Seeing the monsters, Mason took out a gun. One of the mutants was happy to have new victims. The bullet easily passed through her neck, but stopped the attack for a while. Old Bruce found the senior conductor and demanded that the train be stopped. He felt that everyone was in great danger, but there were still 2 hours to the next station, and stops were prohibited along the way. Suddenly, the old man began to shake, something he had not experienced for many years. Bruce saw spirits with a bull's head and a horse's face, who usually took a large number of souls to the realm of the dead. This time, the losses were bound to be enormous. There was no chance of salvation. One after another, the souls went into the fiery abyss, leaving the world of the living. Suddenly, the clairvoyant felt that a faint hope had appeared which the unfortunate could cling to. Bruce woke up. He knew that there was a chance for salvation. The old man saw the eyes of the guy who was riding with him in the same carriage. Haley continued to perform cardiac massage. She didn't want her brother to die. The girl urged Lucas to open his eyes, telling him about the wonderful future that awaited him. The sister noted with horror that her actions had no effect. The young man was probably already dead. However, the main character was simply in some kind of dream, analyzing what happened on the train. Lucas realized that he had been bitten by a girl. The beauty turned into a mutant herself after a pervert grabbed her by the neck. The young man understood that he too had to transform into a creature that ate people and drank human blood. The young man believed that it was better to die than to become a monster, realizing that common sense had not left him, which meant that he was not yet a mutant. Haley was very happy to see her brother open his eyes. He scared her a lot. Lucas was glad to see his sister, warning her that there were monsters behind her. The girl was so afraid to even look back. The main character understood that he could not be saved, so he decided to protect his older sister. Haley saw that her younger brother's skin began to change, like the other werewolves. Suddenly, Lucas felt an energy coming from within envelop him. This was probably the process of mutation of the organism. The young man stood up, preparing for further changes, his hair turning white. Everything slowed down like in a movie, blood poured into my eyes. Lucas felt strong for the first time, something he had never felt before. The monsters flew in different directions from the guy's fists. Haley couldn't believe her eyes. Her brother had always been a weakling. A few minutes later, the young man had killed all the werewolves. The protagonist felt that every move he made was perfect. However, the monsters were still alive and they recovered very quickly. There was no time to think. He needed to run to a safe place immediately. So Lucas took his sister in his arms and prepared to dash. The young man was determined he needed to save Haley. The main character quickly moved around the carriage among the werewolves, holding the precious burden in his arms. The young man jumped over the heads of the monsters, trying to quickly leave the captured carriage. On the way, Lucas revealed a secret to his sister. He was deliberately late for the exam, pretending to be sick. The girl believed that he had acted irresponsibly by not getting into the university. The brother promised to definitely tell the reason for his actions. Returning to the people, the young man asked his sister to take care of herself. The main character told the girl to hide in a safe place with everyone else. The young man knew that he would soon finally turn into a mutant. Haley begged her brother to stay with her, convincing her that together they could overcome any difficulties. Lucas couldn't hold back his tears. He gave the password to his card where he kept the money he had saved and asked to give it to his father, whom he felt very sorry for. As he ran away, the young man asked that the sisters live peacefully and never quarrel. The older sister suspected that her brother's words were very reminiscent of a farewell speech. Lucas looked at the people around him, feeling that the transformation was about to happen. For the first time in his 18 years, the young man felt strength. He needed to take advantage of this moment. He had 3 hitches left to go to his parents. In the next carriage, the mutants were already taking new victims. The main character scattered monsters on the go, moving forward. Lucas's greatest fear was losing his mind. The news has already reported that an unknown epidemic has taken hold of many cities. The sick were uncontrollable, and one could become infected from a bite. There was chaos everywhere, and people were asked not to go outside. Countless hordes of mosquitoes attacked cities, biting people and animals, and were believed to be the source of the mutant virus. The presenter was reporting from the next scene of events. The riots in one of the capital's squares had already ceased. The special services tried to take control of the situation. The train passengers listened attentively to the latest news. Anna continued to vlog. The next car was already filled with werewolves. The girl was afraid that mutants would be able to open the doors and hoped that she would soon become an internet star. An announcement was made over the intercom that there was an emergency on the train, so the management was asking passengers to go to a safe place. At the next station, the train was to be met by medical workers and rescue services. People locked themselves in their carriages, not letting anyone inside. Passengers were waiting for news from their relatives and the train administration. Kate couldn't understand why none of her 3 children were getting in touch, once again blaming her husband for his helplessness. Haley called out to her parents, upset that they were arguing again. The girl said that she was unable to stop Lucas, who went after the second sister. Dennis tried to calm the eldest daughter. Kate walked towards the exit with a determined step. She was going to go look for the children. The woman began to clear the barricade that had just been set up by the passengers. She didn't believe in the stories about werewolves. The guide insisted that the fearless lady not open the door behind which the mutants were located. Seeing the monsters so close, Kate became scared. One of the passengers managed to slam the door, warning that if she was bitten, the woman would turn into the same monster. The man, who was an old friend of Mrs. Lee's, handed her over to her husband. Passengers and conductors continued to build barricades. Kate was amazed at the courage of others while her husband was only concerned about his luggage. Dennis was sitting next to the precious bag again. The head of the family thought about his daughters. He could not allow anything to happen to them. The mutants continued to capture new territories. They went into the dining car. Helen didn't have time to hide. One of the werewolves bit into the instrument case. The girl treasured her guitar very much. The monsters were very close. The shot saved Lucas's younger sister from being bitten. Taylor managed to hit the monster's head and advised the beauty to use the musical instrument for defense. Helen was afraid that she could damage it. The detectives were on the trail of the criminal and needed to move on. The passengers quickly left the carriage. The mutants were very close. One of the girls fell under the pressure of the crowd. No one paid attention to the poor guy. People tried to all go through the narrow doors at once, creating a traffic jam and maiming each other, dying from suffocation and injuries. Taylor and his fellow travelers were fleeing from werewolves and came across a traffic jam of human bodies. Helen was the first to see that the passage was blocked. People were unable to escape from the crowd, blocking the exit. The mutants were very close. There was nowhere to run. Taylor hurried her fellow travelers. She was already out of ammunition. The elder heard that there was no longer a way to salvation. Bruce mentally turned to his patron for help, who opened the all-seeing eye to him. The assistant to the commander of the special department tried to stop the attacking mutants. The old man showed the way. There was another exit in the carriage. Bob supported his grandfather. It was time to save himself urgently. The door to the restaurant's kitchen was open, and Taylor and his remaining survivors ran inside and blocked the exit. Not far from a small town on a dark, rainy evening, a man was returning home in his car. The highway was empty. Suddenly, a girl came out onto the road and asked for a lift. The driver decided to make some money and picked up a female passenger. During the trip, the beauty was drawing something in the back seat. The stranger asked to be dropped off near the cemetery. The man could not have known that one of the tombstones contained a photograph of his passenger. The driver received the payment and quickly left the terrible place. After a few moments, the money turned into ordinary paper. The snow did not stop. The fatal train was heading towards its destiny. A man went hunting and saw a dead deer. The hunter was upset. He planned to get the animal's head himself. After some time, the animal suddenly began to breathe and move. From the train windows, people could see a shocked man with a gun and a large animal along with a small fawn. The train passed, leaving human bones and traces of blood lying on the snow. In one of the carriages, the only living person left was a man. He was sitting on his knees, carefully covering something with his hands from the werewolves attacking from all sides. The father hid his little daughter, closing her eyes and telling her a fairy tale about a knight and a princess. The man had already been bitten several times and was holding on with all his might, protecting his treasure. The main character made it in time and snatched the child from his father's hands. The girl resisted, so Lucas calmed her down, saying that he had come to protect the baby. The young man noticed that the mutation had already ended. The man had turned into a werewolf. However, the father rushed at the other monsters, giving the savior the opportunity to escape with the child. Lucas thought that the remnants of reason still remained in the head of the parent, trying with all his might to help his daughter. Lily questioned her new friend. He was her knight who saved the princess. The main character, carrying the precious burden, quickly ran away from the werewolves, taking advantage of the support of the girl's father. The man played his last role. He will not see his baby again. In one of the carriages, Diana met mutants again. She had nowhere else to run. She tried to drive them away from herself with a scream. The girl was going to go to the last station. Thoughts of suicide had been in her head for a long time, but she did not want her body to be simply torn to pieces. The beauty cried she did not want to end her short life in the jaws of monsters. The mutants came very close. Diana understood that she was about to die. Suddenly, the girl took off and flew over the heads of the monsters. A stranger with white hair in his arms carried out a beauty who had already closed her eyes and resigned herself to death. The werewolves couldn't understand how their prey had escaped them. The young man was angry that the girl did not try to run away, telling her what a hell life would be if she were bitten by mutants. For the first time in her life, Diana felt that someone cared about her. The beauty remained silent, surprising Lucas. In the next carriage, a mother was fighting off mutants with a mop. They had gotten very close to her disabled son. One monster tried to bite the young man on the leg. The main character managed to disperse the monsters in time. Diana looked at her savior as if he were a hero from an action movie. The mutants quickly regenerated. It was necessary to move on urgently. Lucas helped the guy with injured legs to get up and, supporting him, ran on. Lily held tightly to the back of her knight. The werewolves did not give up. They tried to catch up with their prey again. A shot rang out in another carriage. Mason, who was on a mission with his assistant on the train, had to use a gun to hold off the monsters and allow the remaining survivors to escape. The werewolves were waiting for the moment when they could feast on the new body. The detective deliberately tried to distract the monsters' attention. The protagonist realized that the commander saved them, giving them the opportunity to escape. Lucas was worried. He knew that the man had very little chance of survival. Outside the window, the snow did not stop for a minute. The young man hurried the others. There was only a little time left to run to a safe place. Lucas ran through the carriage. Lily sat on his neck, and around him lay the dismembered bodies of mutants who had died for an unknown reason. At the end of the carriage stood a stranger with no signs of life, holding a blade in his hand. The main character and Diana together assumed that it was he who killed the monsters. All the mutants were chopped into pieces. The stranger looked very strange and did not move at all. Lucas looked at the guy, who stood frozen in place like a statue. The corpses seemed to embrace the stranger from all sides. Even the monster's facial shapes were changed by the blows. It seemed like the guy had lost all his strength in the fight against the mutants. The main character came closer. He did not feel the young man's breathing. Lucas assumed that the stranger had died standing up. There weren't even any bite marks on him, but he looked very gloomy. The companions moved on and saw a young man shaking with fear. Henry, with horror in his eyes, begged not to kill him. Lucas calmed the eyewitness down and asked him to tell what happened. The man said that there were many mutants around. Then a stranger appeared who killed everyone and called him a red demon, Diana suggested, taking the shocked man away from the scene. The young man looked around. He could not believe that he would get to a safe place. The red demon still stood motionless in the middle of the carriage in the center of the mountain of corpses. The 12th carriage turned out to be completely empty. It turned out that all the people were lying at the exit, blocking their way. Lucas couldn't believe they hadn't met any mutants yet. But in the next carriage, a whole bunch of werewolves were waiting for everyone. The main character didn't know how to deal with the monsters. The 6 of them wouldn't be able to pass quickly and unnoticed. Another group of mutants were having fun in the restaurant car. The cook offered everyone dishes with fried ears and eyes. The friends were in despair. They did not understand how they could pass by numerous enemies. Lucas thought that he could easily slip past on his own. The main character understood that he was gradually mutating. His body became much stronger, but his brain remained the same. Diana unexpectedly suggested her own option. The girl had starred in zombie films several times and knew their characteristics. The beauty said that if they do not breathe, they should not be noticed. In addition, the monsters are attracted by sound, so she came up with one clever way, but it is difficult to guarantee success, although there are simply no other options. A few minutes later, the mutants heard screams and were delighted with a new portion of food. The werewolves gathered in a group, looking at the victim. The girl was shaking with fear and begged not to touch her. For the sake of this attempt, the main character had to sacrifice his new phone, around the screen of which all the werewolves had gathered. In a separate kitchen section, several people barricaded themselves from the mutants. Helen listened enthusiastically to her favorite music. The assistant conductor was on the trip for the first time and was very scared. Bob slept on his grandfather's lap, begging the spirits of death in his sleep not to take his only relative. Taylor stood guard at the entrance with a huge kitchen knife. The young man watched those around him and was on the verge of a breakdown. He was going to write a farewell letter to his family. While the mutants watched the short film, the small group covered their noses and moved cautiously through the dining car. The main character ordered everyone to move silently and remain silent. Even little Lily understood the gravity of the moment. The hardest thing was for the mother with a sick son. The friends moved quietly forward past the crowd of mutants enjoying themselves. Lucas tried to believe in success, otherwise they would simply be torn to shreds. The woman tried to walk as quietly as possible, but her son couldn't keep up with her, accidentally knocking over a Coke can lying on the floor. Everyone froze in place, the sound of the speakers slightly drowning out extraneous sounds. The mutants realized at the last minute that it was a phone and not food, and saw through the scammers. Now Lucas tried to protect his fellow travelers. Werewolves blocked the way from all sides. The main character had nothing to lose. He had already suffered from the monster's bite. The young man ordered his friends to run away, and he stayed behind to cover them. Diana was very worried about her savior. Lucas promised to catch up with the others later. The young man needed everyone to go away, then no one would be able to stop him. The girl couldn't leave her friend, but he handed Lily over to her. The little girl reassured her older friend. She believed that knights always win. Diana really wanted this to be true. The main character was left alone with the mutants. Lucas picked up a mop to try to keep the monsters at bay and firmly ordered them not to move until he left the car. Suddenly, the young man felt ill and could not understand what was happening to him. His head began to hurt very badly, and the young man lost control over his enemies, who became active and wanted to swallow the impudent opponent. The main character was afraid that he would not be able to resist. He was shaking violently. His strength was running out. One of the monsters came very close. Lucas could already feel someone else's breath and saw teeth in front of him. Realizing that he was about to be bitten again, instead of biting, the mutant went limp and fell, with a sharp blade sticking out of his mouth. Nearby, someone's shadow was crushing monsters, which flew in different directions. The young man took advantage of the temporary confusion and grabbed a fire extinguisher, which became a combat weapon in the fight against werewolves. Finally, Lucas saw his savior, who easily flew between the mutants and killed them with one blow of his knife. The tablecloth from the table also turned out to be a necessary item to briefly incapacitate the enemy. The protagonist was surprised that the tall man from the previous carriage, who stood like a statue, survived. The exhausted young man sat on the floor with corpses of monsters lying around him. The stranger showed his partner his weapon and revealed a secret. It turned out that if you break or pierce the monster's skull, it will die. Lucas had difficulty understanding what his savior was saying. It was time to join the fight again. The next batch of werewolves was already very close. The main character wielded a heavy fire extinguisher, driving the mutants away. The stranger, who called himself Noah, protected the young man from behind, piercing the heads of the werewolves with a sharp blade. Now Lucas knew that the skulls were the most vulnerable spots of the enemies, so he brought the metal cylinder down on their heads with all his might. To the young man's delight, the mutants really did not get up again after receiving a blow to the back of the head. Noah watched with satisfaction his new acquaintance, who had initially seemed like a weakling to him. One of the opponents wanted to take away the fire extinguisher by testing the metal with his teeth. The other werewolves decided to join in and help their comrade. Seeing that the monsters were approaching from all sides, the savior advised Lucas to urgently run away with him. The main character didn't need to be told a second time. He rushed towards the exit like a bullet. The young people immediately left the dining car. It was quiet in the 13th carriage. Diana looked at the door with hope. The fellow sufferers calmed down a little, hoping that there would be no more mutants. At the exit, the girl noticed a crying woman covering her face with her hands. The beauty turned to the stranger, asking how she could help. The woman opened her arms. She turned out to be a werewolf and was looking for her skin. There were only muscles on her face. Diana was very scared and couldn't move. The mutant was already ready to pounce on a new victim. Monsters came out from all sides again, rejoicing at the fresh food. The mother of the disabled child grabbed a broom and prepared to defend him. Another mutant approached Henry, who was shaking with fear. Diana covered Lily with her body, ordering her to run away. The baby was crying. She was very scared. Suddenly, an ordinary plate flew straight at the monster's head, and then a knife. The girl watched in confusion as her enemy fell, almost touching her. The main character was pleased that he had grabbed several knives and utensils from the restaurant and managed to come to the rescue in time. The beauty could not believe that her friend had returned. The little girl was the happiest when Lucas arrived. A crowd of werewolves appeared at the doors of the carriage again. Noah reacted instantly and rushed towards them with his blade. None of those present had time to understand what had happened. The strange defender acted like lightning, piercing the mutants' heads one after another with his point. A few minutes later, the corpses of the monsters that Noah had destroyed lay on the floor of the carriage. Diana covered Lily's eyes so she couldn't see the carnage. Even the girl could not believe that all the enemies were killed. The main character grabbed the beauty by the hand. There was no time to waste. The next batch of monsters could soon arrive. Lucas ordered everyone to move forward as quickly as possible. Lily noted that their new acquaintance turned out to be cooler than her knight. He didn't run away, but killed his enemies. The monsters began to move again. Diana quickened her steps. The mutants, as best they could, crawling and on all fours, again pursued the fleeing people. The main character held the girl tightly. He understood that if it weren't for Noah's help, they wouldn't have been able to cope with such a large number of werewolves. Diana looked at her savior, who once again saved her from the attack of the monster. It was already deep night. The snow did not stop. People on the train tried to catch the connection, which was often lost, and call loved ones to find out the latest news. The blogger continued to film videos and respond to numerous comments. Anna rarely had the opportunity to go live on air, so she recorded excerpts for later. Suddenly, a girl's face appeared behind the glass. She asked to be let in to escape from the mutants. The tired fellow travelers finally reached the carriage with people. The group was met with hostility, fearing new cases of infection. In front of everyone stood the father of a disabled child. He was very unhappy that his wife and son had been saved. Noah understood the mood of the passengers. No one wanted to meet mutants again. The black-haired young man noticed that one of the girls was filming him on her phone. Anna immediately fell in love with the slender, handsome man. Diana thanked her friend for being able to lead them to safety. The main character was very tired. He could not understand what was happening to his body, which after a powerful charge of energy suddenly weakened sharply. The beauty looked at her savior in surprise. The girl noticed that the young man's white hair had become dark, and he himself could barely stand on his feet. Lucas could smell the pleasant scent coming from his companion and hear her quiet voice. The young man decided that the transformation was continuing, and he urgently needed to move away from the beauty so as not to eat her. Those around him also noticed that one of the newcomers had changed and insisted on his departure. The women were afraid for their children, so the disabled man's mother supported the others, despite the fact that Lucas had helped her on numerous occasions. Diana tried to stand up for the young man, outraged at how ungrateful people were. The passengers were determined and were going to throw the girl and the guy out of the carriage. Noah silently watched the people around him. The main character was afraid that Diana might be thrown out the door with him, so he got up and headed for the exit. Lucas admitted to everyone that he had been bitten a long time ago. The young man warned the screaming passengers that the mutation could happen at any moment, and then he would definitely eat them all. The people around him got scared and moved away from the dangerous guy. The main character asked not to anger him, so that he would not turn into an evil werewolf ahead of time. Passengers armed themselves with household items in order to defend themselves. Lucas sternly ordered the beauty to also move away from him. However, Diana was not afraid of the young man who had saved her many times. She did not believe that he was dangerous, realizing that the guy was simply sacrificing himself for her. The young man confirmed his words about the mutation and gave the girl a frying pan so that she could protect herself from him the next time they met, since he would already be different, and a slap in the face would not be enough to deal with monsters. Only now did the beauty notice the wound on the main character's hand. Diana began to understand the meaning of the words spoken by her savior. Lucas looked back one last time. He really liked this girl. The beauty looked at the iron frying pan. The words about the slap made her remember the events at the station. Now Diana understood that she was wrong when she called the guy a pervert. He was completely different and would not have done such a dirty thing. The main character was already heading towards the exit when the girl caught up with him. She asked him to take her with him and was ready to die. Lucas had no choice but to intimidate the passengers if they did not detain the beauty and let him leave peacefully. The crowd grabbed Diana and held her by force, despite the girl's resistance, realizing that the young man was going to certain death. The beauty desperately asked the guy not to leave the carriage. Those around him, on the contrary, hurried the young man, fearing that he would mutate right before their eyes. Lucas tried not to listen to the girl he liked at first sight. He thought about how mutants shouldn't eat their own kind. As he was saying goodbye, the main character smiled at the girl, apologizing for upsetting her, and wished her a good morning and good night in the future. For the first time in a young man's life, a girl cried because of him. Little Lily also saw off her night with tears in her eyes. Lucas carefully moved to the next car. There were many mutants, each of them talking to themselves, telling about their worries and problems from their past lives. The werewolves quickly took notice of the newcomer. As the door closed behind Lucas, the passengers began to reinforce the exit again. Diana cried in despair that she could not convince those around her. The little girl slept on the lap of her older friend, asking the night in her sleep when he would marry her. The main character thought about his family with warmth and regret, mentally saying goodbye to his sisters and parents. The young man regretted that he had not lived up to expectations and was a weakling. The train continued along the long route. The mutants took over most of the cars and continued their search for food. The fifth car was crowded. Passengers from other places had managed to hide here. Haley recalled practical skills and provided first aid to those in need. Lee's eldest daughter was 4 months pregnant, and the baby inside had not yet created any additional problems. The girl watched her mother continuously dial the phone numbers of her younger children, but there was no connection. Kate was worried about the lack of information about her son and younger daughter. Haley hugged her mother and tried to calm her down. The woman was glad that her daughter came over. She had wanted to talk to her for a long time. Kane plucked up her courage and suggested that the girl have a medical abortion after returning home. To her surprise, she agreed. Haley had already thought about it too. The father of the family sat nearby, guarding the valuable cargo. The mother understood that the child was important, but it was a very difficult and responsible decision, and she told about her difficult fate. She had made a mistake a long time ago. The girl listened to the family story with excitement. Kate's parents were very rich. However, the young girl fell in love with a simple village boy with whom she studied at a technical school. The mother and father condemned their daughter's choice and did not want to accept the new family member, but the girl became pregnant. The young couple got married without the blessing of their relatives, who disowned them. A difficult family life began. Dennis worked constantly to provide for his wife and newborn daughter. Kate was not ready to spend all her time in the kitchen and raise the baby. The Lee family moved to a big city where they could find work, constantly fighting over poverty. Haley had seen scandals since childhood and often thought about what would have happened if she had not been born. So she also began to think about abortion. A message from her friend dispelled her doubts. He was also not ready to take responsibility for someone else's life. A signal appeared and Helen managed to reach her father. The girl asked how her parents were doing and where her headphone charger was. The daughter reported that she was in the kitchen of the restaurant car with several passengers and asked her father not to walk around the cars for safety reasons. The girl said that next to her there was a special department employee, a guide's assistant, and 2 others. The mutants sensed that there were people inside the room and were trying to break down the door. Old Bruce sat on the floor, his grandson sleeping on his lap. Kate indignantly took the phone from her husband. The woman was worried. She asked her daughter about her health and wondered how Lucas was feeling. Helen was afraid of upsetting her parents. She hadn't seen her brother for a long time, so she cited a bad connection and hung up. Kate tried to call back several times, but the number was unavailable. The girl was upset. She thought that Lucas was with his parents. They were most worried about him. Kate decided not to wait for help and go to save her daughter and son on her own. Haley tried to calm her mother, who did not see the mutants. The woman took a stick and resolutely headed towards the exit of the carriage. The eldest daughter said that werewolves destroyed a large number of people, so you need to take care of yourself in order to survive. Haley had seen her mother unhappy with her fate all her short life, so she took out all her negative emotions on her eldest child, hoping that she would be able to make all her dreams come true. The girl studied constantly for her mother's sake, passed her exams with flying colors, and entered a prestigious university to become a doctor and escape poverty. Only now did the girl understand that her mother was very sorry that she had given birth to her. She never hugged or kissed her daughter, despite the fact that the child constantly tried to please and fulfill all her demands. Upset, Haley asked her mother if she loved her. Kate didn't say anything. She just said that she would be glad if her eldest daughter didn't repeat her mistake. The woman hoped that if the child was not born, life would improve. But the girl doubted her mother's assumptions. Suddenly, the baby began to move, as if he was reacting to a difficult conversation. A few seconds later, the passenger's attention was drawn to a strange glow at the end of the carriage. Dennis prepared to go and save the children, putting on a special metal protection that he kept in his bag all this time. The wife and eldest daughter were shocked by the appearance of the head of the family. The homemade armor was supposed to protect against mutant bites. The man offered those who wanted to join the rescue operation. He was ready to provide equipment for free. One of the internet lovers was ready to try to meet the werewolves. Some of the passengers were willing to buy the remaining items for their own safety. Dennis agreed to sell his inventions for cash only, leaving some of the necessary items for his family. Haley and Kate looked at the head of the family in surprise. For the first time, he was able to earn a lot of money. Within minutes, all items were sold out. Passengers appreciated the quality of the equipment and the talent of the inventor. Dennis was even touched by the flattering words of those around him. The main character lay exhausted among the crawling mutants. His thoughts were about his parents. He no longer hoped to see them. Lucas heard numerous voices coming from nowhere and pain throughout his body. Someone was constantly talking about something. All the sounds were intertwined. Sometimes someone's commands interrupted the others. The young man didn't know what was happening and what world he was in. One of the mutants grabbed the main character from the pile by the throat, assessing him. The beauty with shining eyes and a gadget in her head carefully studied the new body. In the end, Lucas was thrown aside. Probably because the owner didn't like him, he suddenly didn't want to die. The mutant girl absorbed everyone and went to the next car, no longer paying attention to the lying newcomer. The main character thought that it was time to start saving the others again, if he was still alive. The young man tried to sit up. Every movement was difficult for him. Suddenly, he remembered Helen. The sister was also worried about her brother. They were twins, so they could feel each other. The train passed through a long mountain tunnel. Bob decided it was time to get out of the carriage and tried to wake up his grandfather. The mutants began to attack the kitchen with renewed vigor, and Taylor and his assistant rushed to strengthen the defense. Everyone needed to hold the entrance immediately. Suddenly, Helen felt a strong pain in her body. The werewolves had already almost completely broken down the door. The special department employee and her young assistant guide understood that mutants would soon penetrate their shelter. Everyone watched in horror at what was happening around them. Helen and Bob were so frightened that they were hoarse and could not scream. A small team of 3 rescuers prepared to exit the carriage, checking their equipment. Besides Dennis, 2 more people were going to help their family. A long-haired young man who had his own weapon, and Greg, an internet enthusiast and small business owner who was not very popular with his subordinates. David joined the men to save someone important to him who remained in another carriage. Dennis said goodbye to his daughter, promising to return soon with the younger children. Kate could not believe that her husband was capable of fighting mutants for the sake of his daughter and son. The head of the family left a bracelet as a farewell, apologizing for the fact that over the years he had never given her anything. Dennis hoped to return soon, but still said goodbye to his family. The wife looked at her husband, surprised at how he had changed. His gaze reminded her of the old guy she had been in love with. The squad set off. Haley asked her father to be careful because they would be waiting for him. Tears were pouring from Dennis's eyes. He had already forgotten what love and respect from loved ones were. The head of the family walked proudly past the men remaining in the carriage. However, the weight of the equipment was quite large, and Senior Lee was unable to hold on and fell with a crash. The eldest daughter looked at her father with fear, worried that he had broken something. The opponent helped Dennis up from the floor. The man looked at his competitor, not understanding why Kate hadn't divorced him yet. The squad approached the door, separating them from the mutant world, and a few moments later, the remaining ones barricaded it again. Dennis suggested letting the enemies get closer so they could strike together. The train continued moving through a narrow mountain tunnel. In one of the carriages where Diana was traveling, passengers continued to block the exit. The remaining people hoped that the mutants would not be able to reach them, so they gathered calmly to wait for help. The beauty could not calm down. She scolded herself for letting the young man go to his death. The girl's grandmother approached her. She was looking for her little grandson. Diana read a note on the old woman's chest, which said that she had memory loss, and included the phone number of her relatives. The beauty calmed the woman down, sat her down on a bench, and promised to bring the boy. There was a scream at the other end of the carriage, and the disabled man suddenly bit his father on the finger. The man was angry and threatened to kill the guy. Those around him became worried. The young man had changed a lot in the last few minutes. The passengers were frightened and offered to kill the reborn mutant. The mother steadfastly protected her child, not letting anyone near him. However, the young man continued to turn into a monster in front of everyone around him. The father was also scared, because if he was bitten, then he too should become a mutant. The disabled man was able to stand on his own feet for the first time in many years and was happy about this fact. Those present tried to stay away from him. The woman could not believe that her son was walking, thanking divine powers for this. The young man approached his mother and bit her on the neck. The passengers ran away in panic. It was necessary to kill the mutant immediately so that he would not infect and eat the others. A massacre began in the carriage. One after another, the bitten people turned into werewolves, while others tried to neutralize them. Suddenly, a black-haired youth stepped into the center of the battle. Anna turned on the camera to film the handsome man. What she saw surprised her. Noah was smashing the monsters' heads with his feet. The blogger told her subscribers live on air how the young man dealt with mutants in cold blood. The girl fell madly in love with a cool guy. The passengers tried to unlock the doors, which had recently been blocked with suitcases to keep the monsters out. Panic and crush began in the carriage. Everyone tried to shout down each other. The loud noise gave Noah a headache. Something clicked in the mutant killer's brain. He compared a bunch of people to a swarm of flies that needed to be exterminated. Dennis and his partners fought their way through the adjacent car, which was filled with werewolves. The equipment turned out to be reliable. The monsters couldn't bite through the metal. One of the mutants climbed onto Father Lucas's back to reach his head, but the makeshift helmet was strong. Greg and Dennis stood back to back and beat the approaching mutants with all their might. Even a drill came in handy in the fight. The pile of iron served as a reliable protection for brave men. The internet enthusiast deftly wielded a huge frying pan. The rescuers were glad that they were able to get past the carriage. They needed to move to the next one before the enemies caught up with them. The mutants regenerated very quickly and were ready to attack people again. While Dennis tried to open the door, his partner covered his back. The handle was jammed. They had to try to knock the lock out by force. Suddenly, Greg saw a familiar face at the end of the carriage they had just passed. David stood motionless. He abandoned the homemade armor and took only his own equipment. In their haste, the partners completely forgot about the third satellite. The werewolves began to come to their senses. It was time to fight off the tenacious creatures again. Dennis couldn't get the lock to open, so the only thing left was to break the glass. At this time, David took out a sharp, narrow sword from his case. The young man moved quickly, dealing crushing blows to the reviving werewolves. Greg had the feeling that there were several young men in the carriage. So quickly was their assistant flying around the carriage. David was skilled in the use of cold weapons. Within minutes, the room was filled with mountains of motionless monsters. The young man was glad that he did not disgrace himself in front of his new acquaintances and did his job with dignity. The men looked at their partner with surprise and delight. One of the emergency services received an emergency call. The connection stopped working. Several dozen cities were left without connection. The repairmen who arrived at the scene were shocked by the whirlwinds of mosquitoes wrapping around the central tower. No one else saw the men. In the carriage where Diana and Lily were, the transformation of people into mutants continued. The werewolves immediately bit their loved ones. The process did not stop. The girl's fiancé, who had already turned into a monster, tried to kiss her. Noah was nearby and saved the unfortunate woman from the monster. The young man deftly thrust the blade into the mutant's head. However, the werewolves did not calm down and looked for new victims. The young man pushed aside the girl who was trying to thank him for saving her and prepared to attack. A few seconds later, another monster received a blow to the skull. The young beauty asked the stranger to protect her. She could not trust anyone anymore. However, the groom managed to transmit the virus, and the girl's face began to change before our eyes. The poor thing screamed in pain. The skin on her face cracked and started bleeding. Noah could not stand the loud sound and asked the unfortunate woman to shut up. The young man suddenly grabbed the girl by the hair. Then the young man hit the stranger's face on the floor several times with all his might. The poor thing begged to let her go. She didn't want to die. After a few minutes, the screams and groans stopped. Diana sat in horror under the bench and tried not to breathe. The beauty covered the baby's eyes with her hands so that she could not see this nightmare. The unfortunate woman was lying very close on the floor of the carriage, bleeding. It was clear from her face that the girl did not die from mutants. She was brutally murdered. The monsters bit everyone in a row. There was nowhere to wait for help. At this time, the stranger calmly walked through the carriages captured by the werewolves and wrote something down in his electronic notebook. The man noted the X47 virus, time and statistics of mutations. The man's face showed that he was pleased with the results. They turned out to be more interesting than he had expected. A minute later, the dead girl's body was removed from the passage. Not far from Diana, the same grandmother who had lost her memory and was looking everywhere for her little grandson was hiding. The beauty tried to stop the old woman who wanted to crawl out of hiding, hoping that they had not been discovered. However, the black-haired guy had long ago determined where the remaining survivors were hiding. Out of fear, Anna dropped her phone and was also discovered. Noah pulled Diana out of hiding by her hair. The girl could not understand why they were not killed immediately. Like the previous victim, Lily was very scared and hugged her friend, who became an older sister to her. A few seconds later, 3 more passengers were sitting on the floor in the center of the carriage, realizing that no one could save them from the maniac, who no longer distinguished mutants from people. While Anna was filming the video with permission, the young man was looking for something in his luggage bag. The killer calmly changed his clothes and invited those present to play a game. Noah sat the participants in a circle and took out a sharp knife. The blade spun like a roulette until it came to a complete stop. The first victim was one of the passengers in the neighboring car, who managed to avoid being bitten by the mutant's husband. The woman jumped to her feet screaming and tried to run away. Noah caught up with the unfortunate woman in cold blood and killed her in front of the others. Despite the wild fear, the blogger continued reporting, Diana covered the baby. Before continuing the game, the maniac combed his hair and asked those remaining not to run away and calmly accept their fate. The leader of a small group of special investigations, Mason, moved carefully through the train, eliminating mutants one by one, fearing to run into a larger group. The man noticed that the guts and fresh blood of the werewolves were a temporary disguise from them. In one of the carriages, the detective noticed a large number of killed monsters and ordinary people. While examining the bodies, the police officer noticed the nature of the stab wounds. The results of the investigation indicated that the maniac on the train was the same one that Mason and his assistant had recently tracked down. The game continued. The deadly roulette spun again. The knife stopped, the tip pointing at Lily. The baby didn't stop crying. Diana understood that the psychopath didn't care who was in front of him, an adult or a child. Anna couldn't believe that the handsome man could kill the girl. The girl offered to kill her instead of the baby. She had long wanted to part with life. The beauty agreed to everything, just so that the maniac would let Lily go. Just before leaving, Lucas handed the baby over to Diana, telling her that her father had been eaten by mutants, and asked her to take care of her in his place. The main character didn't know when he would finally mutate, so he tried to leave the girls as quickly as possible. The beauty remembered her savior. Not knowing what happened to him now, she did everything for the little girl and was ready to die for her. The girl listened as Noah talked about the blood, realizing that she was dealing with a dangerous mental patient. Diana remembered a film about madmen, where she played one of the roles. Then, before filming, the director told the actors about the peculiarities of the behavior of maniacs. For them, it was important that the victim cried and begged for salvation. The train continued moving along its route. From all sides, the train continued to be attacked by mutants, and their numbers grew larger and larger. The assistant driver reported to the chief that there was no connection with the stations, and the equipment could not withstand the load. But he decided to continue on his way. If the train stopped, there would be no chance of rescue at all. Noah was angry. He couldn't understand why Diana wasn't screaming in horror. The girl gathered her last strength. She had nothing to lose, so she began to scold the young man, calling him a mistake of nature, whom everyone hated. The maniac's thoughts were filled with childhood memories. His father constantly beat him. His peers bullied him, so he cruelly dealt with those who were weaker and more helpless than him. Little Noah killed dogs, birds, insects, and had constant headaches. Lily complained to her friend that she was very scared. Diana reassured the girl that it was just a movie game where everything was fake, so everything would be fine. The beauty suggested that the little girl close her eyes and wait until it was all over. The maniac was very angry at the girl, who instead of being afraid, calmed her little friend. With the words "die," Noah raised the sharp blade over the victim's head. Just a few months ago, young television actress Diana called her father, who had left the family, and she really needed his support. The father could not stand the character of his wife, who now used her daughter to make money on her. He had a new family where he was happy. The girl apologized and hung up the phone. At home, a scandal awaited the beauty, although in the last few years, her mother constantly yelled at everyone and was always unhappy. Information appeared on the networks that Diana had violated the terms of the contract. Fans suspected the acting duo of having sexual relations, and the company demanded compensation for damage to their reputation. The girl was left without work. She promised her mother to pay off all her debts. The beauty tried to explain that she had been set up on purpose, but her mother did not want to listen to her daughter. The woman was angry. She reproached the girl and her ex-husband for all their sins, wishing them to die. These are the same words the maniac said now. Then Diana could not sleep, remembering the curses that her mother said. The girl cried all night. She didn't want to live. To earn money and pay off her debts, the beauty had to get a job in a small studio. The salon was mainly used to film cheap porn films. Diana did not like to undress in front of the camera in front of numerous spectators. Once again, having received no response from her father, the girl wrote to him that she dreamed of ending her life. The feelings that Diana was experiencing now were not at all comparable to the pain that was in her soul, so she was not afraid to die. The beauty calmly looked into the eyes of the killer. She was not afraid of him. Noah was upset. He expected to get pleasure, but the girl was stronger in spirit. The maniac absolutely needed a victim who would resist. This really excited him. A new idea flashed through his head, and he rushed forward. Having left the carriage with people, the main character found himself among mutants who were studying the strange newcomer. Lucas was completely exhausted and couldn't even move. One of the infected girls, similar to Meg, grabbed him by the throat, not letting him breathe, to determine if he was fit for prey. Finding nothing interesting for itself in the lifeless body of the guy, the monster threw him away and, absorbing similar creatures into one big lump, left. The young man lay on the floor, his short life slowly floating in his head. Lucas was the younger of the twins and very weak. The older sisters constantly protected their sick brother. After the bite, the main character received a huge boost of energy for a while, but this period turned out to be very short, after which there was complete impotence. Now his devastated soul was traveling through unknown places, similar to the afterlife. Upset at the thought of never seeing his family again, Lucas heard the sounds of music ahead. Strangely dressed girls greeted the young man, escorting him to a red tent. The beauty greeted the main character, inviting him to come visit. Lucas moved towards the stranger as if under hypnosis. Someone's sharp call from behind stopped the young man. Nearby stood a strange passenger from the carriage, the blind Bruce, who was usually accompanied by his grandson Bob, but now he was alone. Now the main character felt the chains that enveloped his body. The elder explained that the young man had been bewitched by a devil from the afterlife and tried to remove the shackles. If the old man had been late, Lucas would have remained in the kingdom of the dead forever. He was in a hurry, knowing that someone really needed the guy's help. The old man himself remained. He still had his own plans. Noah raised the sharp blade over the girl's head. Diana cried, realizing that her new friend could no longer come to her aid. Suddenly, the carriage door flew out under the pressure of a huge ball, which crushed the maniac. The black-haired youth couldn't understand what was happening. The other passengers looked in amazement at the strange lump consisting of many werewolves. Anna tried to take a video. Henry prayed to wake up from this nightmare. Diana watched the transformation of the monster. The first thing that emerged from the ball was a woman's head. Even the monster's legs were very powerful. Noah tried to get out of the mass that rolled towards him. The lump of mutants, merged into one organism, was again moving towards the victim. Despite its size, the super mutant could move quickly, and its desire was to take revenge on the killer and consume him. Noah fell from the blow, not understanding why the monster was attacking only him. Blood flowed from the maniac's numerous wounds, gradually bringing him to a sense of excitement. The killer felt high and was ready to join the battle. Diana covered the baby's eyes with her hands. She again remembered the director who said that if the maniac saw his blood, it would provoke him even more. Noah was really excited. He decided to attack the enemy and test his endurance. Bodies and parts of monsters flew out of the ball in all directions. The blogger was delighted with the successful photos. She imagined the killer as a deity destroying monsters from hell. More and more mutants continued to emerge from the large lump. The head and body of the monster again absorbed its relatives, trying to capture Noah as well. The killer realized who controls the werewolves. The maniac's fingers turned into sharp claws, and his body began to transform. Noah was about to cut off the mutant's head. The young man took out his blade to dismember the tangle of monsters. The black-haired killer climbed onto his back to carry out his evil plan. A few seconds later, the super mutant was decapitated, his head rolling across the floor. However, the werewolves continued to move and cling to their opponent, the body parts again gathering into one mass. Noah continued to attack the enemy. The maniac decided to see what was inside the ball. Noah was extremely agitated and aggressive. The young man tried to cut the main body with a sharp blade. The killer managed to saw the huge monster's chest in half. The young man jumped on the enemy, who stopped resisting for a while. The maniac began to tear the body apart with his fingers to see what was inside. Quite unexpectedly, the main character's head appeared from the wound. Lucas greeted his surprised opponent cheerfully. The young man calmly got out of the pile of werewolves. The young man did not hesitate and grabbed his former partner firmly by the throat. Noah could barely breathe, but still threatened to kill Lucas. Werewolves approached the offender from all sides. Diana and her baby could not believe the miraculous rescue. Anna didn't want to think about someone being stronger than her idol. Numerous mutants were ready to eat the black-haired guy. Noah felt a general weakness. His hands did not obey him. He could not resist at all. The killer felt that his body and mind were under the complete control of the enemy. The maniac flew helplessly into the abyss of incomprehensible memories and sensations. He saw how the boys did not want to play and beat one of them. One of the offenders called the guy a weakling. The boy cried and did not understand why no one wanted to be friends with him. Suddenly, a fair-haired teenager appeared and extended a helping hand. The child could not believe his eyes. No one offered him friendship. However, the boy stood up proudly and refused support. Noah realized that he had somehow ended up in the childhood of his opponent, who was bullied by everyone and not accepted into their company. The blond boy noticed that he was being watched. Lucas invited the black-haired stranger to go play together. The boys held hands, considering themselves friends. Suddenly, Noah was left alone, not understanding where his new acquaintance had disappeared to. The teenager noticed that he was standing in the middle of a puddle. The reflection in the water was of a blond guy. The maniac came to his senses. He was afraid that his rival had absorbed him. Now they had become one. The mutant squeezed his throat tightly, but the killer did not want to give up. Werewolves tore the enemy apart from all sides. The ball gradually swallowed up the helpless Noah. The blogger recorded footage of her idol disappearing among the bodies of monsters. Anna couldn't believe that the cold-blooded handsome man could lose. Diana also did not believe that the killer would be eaten by a crowd of mutants. Grandmother closed her eyes and read a prayer. Noah saw himself as a little lonely boy again. Lucas came to pick him up to play together. The black-haired teenager turned around at the sound of the voice. The guy agreed and showed his new friend his favorite toys. Noah crushed the bird with a light movement of his foot. The little maniac stood among the corpses of helpless creatures, explaining that he had sent them all into eternal sleep to ease their suffering and thirst for life. The black-haired boy liked that lifeless bodies didn't make sounds. The fair-haired boy looked in horror at the mountains of innocent dead animals. The boy couldn't understand when his new acquaintance managed to do this. Little Lucas felt sick from what he saw. Noah didn't understand why his friend didn't like his hobby and suggested that they continue playing together. The young killer insisted that over time this kind of entertainment would become enjoyable and enjoyable. Now behind the maniac lay the corpses of mutants and people. Lucas refused to take part in such games and went home. Noah stood among the dead bodies and continued to call out to his blonde friend. The maniac insisted that Lucas was one of the werewolves and would not be able to get out without outside help. The killer believed that this was all his game. He was the boss, and everyone else had to obey him. Noah declared himself a deity and ordered his opponent to kneel. The cells inside the black-haired boy's body continued to mutate. Noah's body began to fill with fresh energy, destroying those around him. Bone spikes flew in all directions, piercing the monsters. The maniac's hands turned into a formidable weapon that could easily break bones. The killer's eyes flashed a bright red light. Noah felt a huge power. He couldn't believe that some weakling wanted to absorb him and take over his consciousness. The maniac released a charge of energy at the main character. The black-haired mutant was glad that he had caused pain to his enemy. Lucas barely managed to stay on his feet. Noah felt invincible. Now he could absorb the blood of mutants to regenerate. Now it was necessary to get rid of the competitor. The killer was ready to conquer the whole world. In the last minutes, his body transformed even more. It was Lucas's turn to be dealt with, so Noah delivered a crushing blow. The main character couldn't stay on his feet. The maniac imagined himself to be the only invincible being in the universe. The young man held on with all his might, and to his surprise, the mutants began to support him. The monsters rushed towards the black-haired killer in a crowd. Noah didn't understand what was going on and why the werewolves were helping Lucas. The monsters surrounded the enemy from all sides, preventing him from delivering the final blow to the fair-haired youth. However, senseless attacks could no longer harm the maniac. They only provoked him. Now Noah could easily squeeze all the power out of his opponents. The mutated killer turned the devastated bodies of his enemies into dust. Over the corpses, the maniac headed towards Lucas again, believing that weaklings were of no use to anyone, and prepared to grind him into dust. The main character stood on his feet with difficulty. Surprising his opponent with his heroism, the werewolves supported him. Diana wondered how strong the killer was if no one could resist him. The remaining survivors looked hopefully from their shelters at the motionless Lucas. It was late at night. Lily couldn't stand it and fell asleep peacefully. The beauty put the baby in a safe place, thinking that the blogger had mental problems. Anna watched her deity with delight, glad that he had survived the monster's attacks and had become stronger. Henry cried quietly in the corner. He no longer hoped to return to his mother. Noah looked at his former partner and didn't understand why he was still alive. He seemed to be in a daze. The mutants once again rushed to attack the enemy. The maniac fought off the attack. He waited for his main enemy to start moving. Tired of waiting, Noah decided to take action himself using a painful hold. The main character felt a sharp pain. It seemed to him that his body was being emptied from the inside. Noah was happy to drink all the enemy's blood and eat his brain. While suffering unbearably, Lucas knew he was not ready to die yet, knowing he had some unfinished business. About an hour ago, when the main character was swallowed by a crowd of mutants, he began to distinguish between the thoughts of people and werewolves. The young man saw a family chat in which they were all discussing the upcoming meeting and the New Year's table. During this time, Haley prayed for her father to find and save the twins. Kate looked at the latest family photos, hoping that everything would turn out well for the children. Helen waited with hope for her family to rescue her. Dennis fought steadfastly against the mutants, trying to find the younger children. The main character thought about the fact that before death, everyone usually remembers their loved ones and their dreams. Lucas thought that he wanted it right now. The surrounding monsters and the young man were thinking the same thing. The young man realized that more than anything in the world he wanted to return home. A cry of despair and hope burst from his throat. Lucas felt his body begin to fill with energy. The pain finally brought the main character to his senses. He remembered his family. His piercing cry resounded throughout the area. Diana looked at her savior with fear. Anna's cap flew off from the loud sound. Henry and the old woman covered their ears in horror. The mutants heard the call. Everyone wanted to get home, so crowds of werewolves from all sides flocked to help. Noah could not stand the loud sounds, and he indignantly ordered his opponent to close his mouth. There was silence, but everyone understood that this roar was not accidental. Suddenly, the glass in the carriage cracked. A second later, all the windows were broken. Sharp fragments flew around the carriage. The protagonist stood firmly on his feet, preparing for a decisive battle. The maniac watched his opponent in surprise, not understanding what was happening. Glass flew from all sides, injuring those present. Passengers tried to hide to avoid being deafened or injured. Mutants started climbing into all the windows. Noah couldn't believe that all the monsters came to Lucas's call. The protagonist stood motionless and gathered strength for the blow. A moment later, the werewolves united into one organism under the control of the fair-haired youth. Lucas was ready for battle. He ordered his assistants to capture the enemy. The maniac saw that all the mutants sided with the enemy. Noah didn't believe that the werewolves had come to save his rival, who was able to call on them for help. The killer wanted everyone to obey only him. Despite his disappointment and surprise, the black-haired maniac was not going to give up. Noah fought back desperately, sending his charges at his enemies. However, the mutants kept on coming in larger numbers, and they continued to arrive in the carriage. It seemed that the werewolves were ready to crush the enemy with their mass. The maniac was going to use his new abilities. Noah sent piercing thorns in all directions. The mutants fell under the impact of sharp arrows. The weapon proved effective, and the werewolf advance was stopped. Noah rejoiced at the opportunity to prove his greatness. The maniac was triumphant, inviting those who wanted to come and kill him. Suddenly, a powerful explosion thundered in the carriage. The shaking was strong. Kate and Haley could barely stay on their feet. The engineer and his assistant were afraid that the train had derailed. Bob thought it was an earthquake and tried to wake up his grandfather, who had not responded to anything for several hours, at which time he was in another world. Dennis and his partners were also worried about what had happened, not knowing what had happened. When the shaking stopped, the main character was standing in the carriage. The maniac's body was lying under a mountain of mutants. Noah didn't yet realize that he had lost. The killer lay on the floor. He felt like he had lost the ability to move. Gradually, the black-haired youth began to comprehend his situation. Noah felt as if his whole body was on fire. The dead mutants were nearby and demanded life in exchange for their lost one. The maniac did not understand why the bodies of the people and monsters he killed were moving, thinking that they were hallucinations. Gradually, the heat increased. The hellish fire approached from all sides. Noah tried to resist, promising Lucas to tear him into little pieces. The main character seemed to be in a state of prostration and did not react to anything. After some time, Lucas woke up and felt ill. The young man stood next to a mountain of dead monsters. Diana was on the other side of the carriage. She asked the guy if there were any more living mutants. The girl looked closely at her savior, not knowing whether his transformation had taken place. Henry and the old woman couldn't believe that the nightmare was over. Anna cried in despair that her hero had lost. The phone fell out of the upset blogger's hands and broke. An alert was sent out to the train that the train would make an emergency stop at the nearest station. There were corpses of monsters hanging outside and inside the carriages. Diana decided to move closer to Lucas. Just in case, the girl picked up a frying pan. Exhausted, Lily slept under the bench, dreaming of her dad bringing her delicious ice cream. Anna could not believe that her idol was dead. The main character sat motionless, not reacting to anything. Diana approached cautiously, her weapon ready for defense. Suddenly, Lucas stood up and moved with difficulty towards the girl. Through the haze in his eyes, the young man saw a cloudy silhouette. Gradually, the vision cleared. The beauty was very close. The main character smelled the delicious prey and felt hungry. The young man's hands reached forward on their own. A copious amount of saliva flowed from his mouth in anticipation of pleasure. The abandoned old chemical plant near the train station was empty. Two people broke the silence with loud voices. The man demanding to see the professor, trying to understand whose fault it was that the virus had spread beyond the train, and how to deal with the consequences of the disaster. The scientist's assistant Chloe calmed her indignant partner. Their leader was originally on the fatal train X-47. The research assistant was interested in whether the mutation had progressed to the next stage. Austin was scared. The virus could acquire a living shell. Then it would be almost impossible to cope with the consequences. Chloe forbade the employee from leaving the plant, ordering him to wait for the infectious agent to awaken further. Diana remembered the last conversation. Lucas warned her that next time he would become a mutant, so hitting her on the head with a frying pan should save her. The beauty looked with distrust at the guy whom she considered the best of those she had ever met. The girl could not raise her hand against the one who had saved her more than once, so Diana put down the heavy frying pan and prepared for the meeting. The main character quickened his pace, dreaming of swallowing the delicacy whole. The beauty watched Lucas's approach with growing anxiety. The girl closed her eyes in resignation. She was ready to give her life to this young man. The bodies met and scarlet blood spurted. The grandmother looked in horror at Diana, who stood meekly and waited for death. The protagonist's teeth bit hard into the soft flesh. The girl felt drops of blood running down her hand. The beauty remembered the last days before the trip. Everyone was absolutely indifferent to her feelings. Even her mother did not want to support her daughter. Diana understood that the only person who cared about her was Lucas. She fell in love with him and was ready to sacrifice herself. However, the girl did not feel pain and was surprised. The main character bit his own hand so as not to harm the beauty. The young man was outraged that the girl did not follow his long-standing instructions and did not hit him with a frying pan. Lucas looked at Diana, trying to understand why she had lowered her weapon. The girl tried to explain that the young man had become like family to her, that he was not like other people. The beauty was ready to burst into tears from happiness that everything was okay with Lucas. The young man noticed that his face was flushed from the warm words. Diana couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears. She didn't know how to live on if the main character mutated completely. The main character stood there, not knowing how to calm his sobbing friend. In another carriage with survivors, a passenger was worried about the condition of her pregnant neighbor. Haley began to think that it was a mistake to keep the child. She was not ready for motherhood and new problems. The girl overheard Kate's conversation with a stranger, who affectionately called her by name. The man, whom Mom called by name, promised that everything would soon be settled. They would be saved, and everything would be fine. Haley was surprised by the meeting, realizing that they had known each other for a long time. New hordes of mutants attacked the train. The assistant asked the driver if they should stop at the station, as had been announced earlier. If they could not even get out, they were distant relatives. It was the train conductor who insisted that the young man go with him on the fateful route. Stopping the train was pointless, but there was a risk that the train could derail due to overheating. The couple held hands, Diana hoping that her friend's blood already contained antibodies, so if he was bitten again, he would not be harmed. The girl happily pulled the guy along with her. The baby slept sweetly, licking her lips in her sleep. The beauty said that during the entire time of separation, she protected the girl as best she could. The main character noticed that the girl's clothes were badly damaged. Diana had numerous wounds and abrasions all over her body, but she was troubled by mental pain. Lucas understood his companion perfectly. Her mother was simply sick, and her father resembled his own father, who was a soft and indecisive person. So he left for another family. The young man tried to console the beauty. Her relatives didn't need her, so she needed a person who would take care of her. The young man told the girl that she was cool and very beautiful. She must have a lot of friends, but received a light blow to the chest. When Diana said she would be fine if nothing happened to Lucas, his cheeks turned red, amazed at her fortitude. The beauty didn't know whether to wake the baby. She never had sisters, and she didn't know what to do with the little ones. Suddenly, Diana thought, she hadn't told Lucas anything about her family. It became quite cold. The windows were broken. Henry suggested getting out of the carriage. First, we needed to find some clothes. The girl was burning with shame, realizing that her friend was able to read her memories and feelings. Dennis and his partners continued to move forward. The father of the family thought that he had overestimated his strength, but he had to keep moving to find the children. Suddenly, a strange creature appeared at the end of the carriage. The conjoined mutant twins looked disgusting. The men thought for a moment and stopped. They were not used to hitting women. Bloodthirsty monsters were also looking down on the rescue group from the ceiling. Werewolves attacked Dennis and his assistants from all sides again. After some time, it became clear that the twins were controlling the mutants. The monsters attacked Father Lucas, trying to find a place to bite. David tried to come to the aid of his partner and took out his sword. The monsters did not calm down and continued to attack people. A small squad of rescuers steadfastly fought off the rapidly regenerating werewolves. The Trinity stood back to back, protecting each other, each thinking about their loved ones. The main character quickly changed his clothes and waited for his friend, thinking about what would happen to them next. Diana looked great. The new jacket suited her. Lucas was ready to turn into a mutant to eat the beauty. The friends were about to continue their journey through the carriages and find the key to the doors when the old woman remembered her grandson. The elderly woman believed that the young man was her son, Diana, her daughter-in-law, and demanded that they go in search of the child. Lucas and the girl were surprised that they became one family. The beauty offered to play along with the sick old woman. The main character had to agree, and together they set off to search for their grandson, or rather, a safe place. Grandma was glad that she was listened to. The elderly woman sent Henry to pick up her wife Anna. The young man could not believe what he heard. The blogger had no intention of parting with her idol. The main character asked the girl again if she would go with them, and was again refused. The video lover sat next to a pile of corpses and cried with grief. Anna found Noah's hand and stroked it constantly. The crazy blogger asked the young man to rise from the dead and return to her. Seeing a new batch of mutants climbing through the windows, the friends ran to the next car. Diana hoped that all the werewolves were already dead. Henry helped the old lady move faster. Lucas decided to stay behind to hold off his pursuers. The main character took out a knife left behind by the maniac. The young man enthusiastically began to cut the monsters into pieces. It seemed as if Noah was back and wielding his blade. Lucas tirelessly crushed the attacking mutants. The bodies of the monsters flew in different directions. The main character even changed his look when he destroyed enemies. Diana turned around to look at her savior. The girl got the strange impression that the young man enjoyed killing. The maniac's knife was indeed an effective weapon. It was difficult to tell what material it was made of. The next batch of mutants was already climbing through the doors. Lucas tried his best to close the entrance to stop the monsters. The main character barely managed to cope with the castle. The forces were unequal. Diana returned for her exhausted friend. There was no time to rest. It was quiet in the next carriage. Everyone was wondering where to find the key to open the exit to the street. The beauty asked what happened to Lucas. He behaved like Noah. The young man himself could not recognize himself. Just recently, he could not hurt a fly. The protagonist assumed that his behavior was due to a mutation. The only thing he thought about before being absorbed into the ball was the dream of returning home. Lucas noted that he then began to sense the thoughts and experiences of mutants and humans, which could have affected his brain. The girl was finally convinced that the young man knew everything about her feelings for him. The young man could not understand why his companion suddenly blushed. Embarrassed, the beauty ran away with Lily. Lucas really found out everything about Diana. He realized that she fell in love with him, but he could not believe it, considering himself a weakling and a loser. A monster's hand was sticking out of the door, and something was shining in its fist. The main character noticed the treasured key. Leaving the others waiting nearby, the young man tried to unclench his hand. It seemed as if the fingers were ossified and would not straighten. After unsuccessful attempts, Lucas managed to pull out the key. Blood spurted from the monster's wound. The scarlet liquid got into my eyes and nothing could be seen. Rubbing his eyes, the main character became frightened. A real monster stood in front of him. The giant mutant was outraged that someone had torn off his tail. In one of the neighboring cars, werewolves also gathered. They were looking for new prey, eating everything in their path. One of the mutant men was eating someone's intestines with gusto. In the monster's hand lay a small child's keychain. The werewolf looked at the toy raccoon. Some memory flashed through his mind. Little Lily loved this keychain. Recently, Stephen took his little daughter to the zoo, and she liked the funny animals with striped tails the most. The man promised to get a raccoon when they could live together, but the girl did not believe his words. Her mother abandoned them, and she had to constantly visit her grandmother. The father promised his daughter that he would take her to his place very soon. The child was happy. Tears glistened in the mutant's eyes. He didn't know what was wrong with his girl. Suddenly, the body began to rebuild itself again. Stephen felt himself growing in all directions. The transformation was complete, and the small keychain fell from the monster's clutches. A huge body with many tentacles moved in search of food. There was a battle going on in the kitchen of the restaurant car. Taylor was trying to chop the monsters with a cleaver. Helen noticed a large, multi-legged monster in the doorway, which was aiming at a blonde guy who seemed familiar to her. The mutant dragon with glowing eyes was ready to attack its victim. Diana watched the monster and was so terrified that she couldn't move. The main character shouted at the girl to run away faster, but she seemed not to hear him. Lucas tried to bring the beauty back to reality with a loud voice. He realized who the formidable mutant was hunting. The monster was flying straight at Diana, but the young man managed to react in time. The young man pushed the beauty away at the last moment. The girl fell to the side, hitting the shelves. The main character was unable to jump back himself and ended up under the brunt of the blow. Diana came to her senses. She was very worried about her friend. An angry Lucas wanted to punish the monster that tried to eat him. The huge mouth was very close. It was necessary not to panic. The young man grabbed the tip of the sharp tongue to tear it out. The young man managed to pull the tongue out several meters before it came off. Lucas felt the excitement and growing strength to strike at the monster again. Powerful streams of energy rushed towards the monster. The giant mutant did not expect the powerful attack and fell apart into pieces. The protagonist was amazed by his strength. He felt that the abilities of the black-haired maniac helped him win. Diana and the baby looked at the monster with disbelief. They could not believe that they were saved again. Lucas insisted that the girls run away immediately before the mutant recovered. The young man grabbed the beauty by the hand and rushed towards the exit. 5 people ran quickly to the other end of the carriage. Luckily, the key fit the lock and the door opened. The girl suggested that her grandmother be the first to exit the carriage. The main character asked his friends to find and bring help. Henry did not believe that someone was going to save them. Lucas didn't hesitate and pushed the guy and the old woman into the snowdrift. The grandmother screamed indignantly. She asked to find her grandson. It was Diana's turn, and as she said goodbye, she invited her friend to go with her. The girl knew that staying on the train was dangerous, even for the bitten guy. Lucas asked not to worry about him and promised to catch up with his friends later. The young man still had to find and save his parents and sisters. The beauty did not know that the young man had many relatives. The main character promised to definitely survive and find Diana. The girl felt shy and tried to smile as she said goodbye. The beauty took the baby on her shoulders and jumped out of the carriage herself. Lucas watched his friend carefully as she flew into a snowdrift. However, the landing was not very successful. Nearby, the fugitives noticed an endless stream of mutants climbing into the carriages. Henry and the old woman were scared. They didn't expect to see so many monsters outside. Diana was also upset by what she saw, and she didn't know if she would see her savior again. The main character was thoughtful. He slowly turned the key in the lock. Lucas also thought about the girl, remembering her look. Out of the corner of his eye, the young man saw movement behind him. The giant monster was ready to attack again. The young man prepared to deal with the monster. Taylor moved carefully through the carriage. She needed to lead her fellow passengers to a safe place. If the monster hadn't been distracted by its tail, they would all have already been in its stomach. The detective's assistant saw danger ahead and prepared to protect the others. Helen grumbled at the assistant guide who was hiding behind her, but he was carrying Bruce, who couldn't wake up. The girl remembered a guy who seemed to her like her brother, only the color of his hair bothered her. At this time, the main character fought off mutants. Despite its enormous size, the monster moved very quickly. Lucas had to jump all over the car to get his punches in time. A large number of mosquitoes had gathered around the central communications tower. A headquarters for their destruction was organized, and a group arrived at the site. The squads were given the order to begin spraying insecticides. Helicopters with special equipment distributed a substance poisonous to insects. After some time, the results became visible. Members of the headquarters and other interested persons could observe the experiments on monitor screens or at the scene. After the mosquitoes were destroyed, the second stage of the operation was announced. The car contained pigs as bait. The train was approaching the station. Everything was ready for cleaning. It was time to act. The control signal sounded. The car with the experimental animals drove up to the carriages. The doors of the van opened to allow the animals to get out. The pigs crowded the street, sniffing the snow. A few seconds later, numerous carcasses of meat were walking around the train. The mutants smelled fresh food. The werewolves began to leave the carriages in a hurry. The monsters pounced on the meat with joy. From the roof of the van, Chloe watched the proceedings with satisfaction. The girl waited until all the pigs were eaten and gave the command in a loud voice. Fighters with special equipment appeared nearby. The squad opened continuous fire on the mutants. The werewolves didn't have time to react and fell to the ground in stacks. The shelling was carried out not only from the ground, but also by a machine gunner from a helicopter who was firing accurately. Almost immediately, only body parts remained from the mutants. After carrying out a control explosion, the helicopter left the scene of the operation. The flying machines returned to their deployment site, accompanied by birds that appeared out of nowhere. For unknown reasons, the number of crows increased sharply. The main character noted that his opponents were much faster than he expected. The monster and its rider became very angry, striking frequently. Lucas was about to finish off the monster, but at the last moment he was distracted by a familiar voice. The younger sister called her brother. She couldn't believe it was him. Helen wanted to ask when the young man had time to dye his hair. The main character was glad to see his sister alive, but he didn't have time to explain what happened, so he asked her to leave the dangerous place immediately. The girl tried to warn the guy that the enemy was very close. Lucas didn't have time to react and received a powerful blow from the tail. The monster took advantage of the moment and attacked the enemy. The young man couldn't hold on and fell with a crash. The sister saw her brother lying on the floor and rushed to save him. Taylor was unable to stop the angry girl. Lucas couldn't move from the pain. The young man asked his sister in a weak voice not to come closer, as he would not be able to protect her now. However, the brave girl was already fighting off the monster with a mop. The sharp tentacles of the giant monster held the guy on the floor. Lucas understood that Helen would not be able to help. He had to think of a way out urgently. The mutant seemed to hear the thoughts and turned his attention to the guy. The monster was about to grab the young man and swallow him. The mouth with powerful, sharp fangs was very close. Suddenly, the train started shaking violently. Taylor and her fellow passengers were unable to stay on their feet, and everyone felt like the carriage was tipping over. The police officer landed on something soft. Bruce was still asleep. The last carriage derailed on the bridge, and the sudden movement sent the mutants flying into the abyss. The coupling couldn't withstand the overload and broke, and the werewolves couldn't stay on the roof. The monsters tried to cling to each other, but the carriage was shaking constantly, so they were unable to stay aloft for long. Hope did not leave even the mutants. They tried to climb up again. Part of the bridge span collapsed, taking the werewolves down with it. Anna felt a sharp blow, fearing that the train had derailed. The blogger did not leave her idle, begging him to protect her. Noah still lay motionless among the dead mutants. Something terrible was happening inside the train. Bodies were mixed together. On one of the turns, the other couplings failed and the cars were thrown in different directions. There was only a little time left until the next station. The driver realized that he had completely lost control. The train flew forward without brakes. It became clear from the navigation that another train was moving towards the train and a collision could not be avoided. There was no communication, and there was no time to warn passengers about the danger. The trains collided at full speed, hitting the middle of the train. Everything shook violently. People fell off their feet. Kate hugged her eldest daughter, worried about her. Dennis and his assistants also couldn't understand what was happening, why the train was shaking so terribly. The impact of the train tore the train into two parts. The last carriage overturned several times. The main character didn't have time to grab onto anything, and he was spinning around along with everyone else. Finally, the shaking stopped. Lucas lay motionless on the floor with multiple injuries. The head of the train derailed after the accident and was moving towards another train standing on a siding. The driver and his assistant understood that another collision was inevitable. The standing train was already very close. The train chief managed to push the assistant out, asking him to take care of his son. The driver himself grabbed the steering wheel, trying to at least slightly change the trajectory of movement in order to reduce the severity of the impact. As a result of the actions, it was possible to shift the traction, so the main impact fell only on the train cabin. The driver mentally said goodbye to his train, which he had driven for many years. The assistant realized that his commander had sacrificed himself to save people. The young man cried, realizing that there was practically no other way. Suddenly, the young man heard footsteps behind him and looked around warily. A detachment of armed warriors in special protection stood nearby. Chloe reported to headquarters that the liquidators had arrived at their position. Train X-47 was cordoned off from all sides. Helicopters and ground equipment were ready to begin the cleanup. Everyone was waiting for the command from higher command. An hour later, the satellites reached an old abandoned station. The wind was very cold. Everyone was frozen and went inside. There were countless mosquitoes lying on the snow. Diana and her friends entered the building. It was very quiet. There was no one anywhere, which made it even more terrifying. A small detachment walked through an empty village. There was no light or people anywhere. Only flocks of crows circled overhead. The girl was haunted by a strange feeling of danger. It was getting light. There was a tower near the abandoned station, and next to it was a car. Everyone could see a large number of corpses wrapped in black bags. At the capital's scientific institute, scientists conducted a study of mosquitoes. It was discovered that they were exposed to an unknown type of radiation and mutated, and at low air temperatures, they became aggressive. Information was conveyed through all channels that one large company had taken on the task of destroying the abnormal insects. All residents were asked not to leave their homes until further notice. The next day, information came from official sources that the danger had been eliminated. Only the old abandoned station was in the red zone, and in 3 days it would be possible to go outside. Many families were happy that they didn't have to go to work or kindergarten. People didn't know what really happened and were happy about the extra day off. Some hoped that the holidays would be extended and were upset that the mutants were defeated so quickly. Crows appeared above the site of the collision of two trains. The last carriage, after several overturns, lay on its side, with a large hole gaping in the center. The remaining survivors gradually came to their senses. The protagonist had a severe headache from the numerous blows, and his forehead was broken. Lucas heard the sound of an engine and ran outside. Large helicopters were circling above the carriage. The young man did not understand what this equipment was doing here and why they were spraying some kind of substance. Deciding that they were rescuers, the young man began waving his hand and calling for help. Helen convinced her brother that there was no point in screaming. Her leg was stuck, and she asked him to help her. The main character thought about it and noticed that all his wounds had almost disappeared. The pain was gone. Now all that was left was to explain everything to his sister, but he himself could not understand what was happening to his body. After spraying some gas, the helicopters flew away. Lucas heard an unpleasant sound and immediately had a bad feeling. The giant monster that stood in front of the main character became even bigger. Bob fainted from fear. The rest of the people did not understand what to do now. It was impossible to escape from such a monster. Taylor could hardly walk after her injuries. The old man disappeared somewhere. The twins looked in horror at the huge mutant with numerous paws, realizing that this was the end. The main character's first decision was to run away from the monster as quickly as possible. The serpentine dragon had no intention of leaving the fugitives behind. There was a high net in the way, and after making sure it was not electrified, the friends climbed through a small opening. Lucas was running last and felt something grab his leg. The monster used its long tentacles to pull its first victim closer. The sister heard her brother's screams and stopped. The main character saw the open mouth of a monster with huge, sharp fangs very close by. Suddenly, out of nowhere, charges flew at the mutant. The monster, taken by surprise, released its prey, and the young man flew to the ground. The young man barely stood up after falling from a height. He hoped that the people from the helicopter returned to save them. Lucas looked around. The rescuers were nowhere to be seen. Not far behind, someone's silhouette was visible in the smoke. Old Man Bruce stood rooted to the spot, sending curses at the evil spirit and promising to destroy the monster. Bob's grandfather was reciting some spells. Helen couldn't believe her eyes. Just before the accident, the old man had been sleeping soundly. The grandson was the one who was most happy about the appearance of his beloved relative. He watched his grandfather's complex manipulations with surprise. Helicopters flew to inspect the site of the collision of the main train of the fatal train. Smoke was coming from the driver's cabin. The flying equipment moved on, not noticing anything strange. Dennis opened his eyes and didn't immediately remember that he was on a train. His head was spinning, and his legs were weak. However, the mutants were advancing. It was necessary to urgently defend themselves. While the father of the family was unconscious, the partners continued the battle. One of the werewolves was very close and was preparing to grab the father of 3 children, but suddenly fell nearby. David came to the rescue in time and killed the monster with his sword. Dennis couldn't get up, his strength was running out. Greg was glad that his partner had come to his senses. He was afraid for his partner. Now he needed to quickly get up and continue the fight with the evil spirits. Senior Lee was left disoriented after suffering a severe blow to his head during the accident. The mutant twin regenerated again and was ready to take revenge on her offenders. One of the heads grabbed Greg's weapon, which he used to strike the monsters. The werewolves came very close and were ready to eat people. Suddenly a shot rang out and the monsters froze, allowing the volunteers to free themselves from their clutches. Someone's shadow appeared in the doorway. The detective managed to come to the aid of the small rescue squad in time. The teammates helped Dennis up. It was time to run, while Mason covered the retreat. The Special Forces officer continued to shoot back at the 2-headed mutant. Suddenly, the rescuers were dumbfounded with fear when they saw a new guest. Another monster appeared in the passage. It was much larger and more terrible than all the previous ones. The monster quickly reached the people. Dennis did not have time to dodge and immediately found himself pinned to the floor by a powerful paw. Greg tried to save his older comrade, but David's sharp blade could not pierce the monster's thick skin. In the last minutes before death, everyone thinks about the past. The head of the family remembered how he did homework with his son. The father always tried to protect his daughters, the youngest of whom was a rebel and did not obey her parents. Dennis knew that being a dad wasn't easy. The assistants continued to fight back to save their friend, but it was impossible to move the thug. The head of the family thought that he was not yet ready to die. He had not yet helped his children, and mentally asked for support from the heavenly powers. The monster froze for a moment, as if he had heard the words about children. Stephen remembered his little girl, whom he missed very much. Before the trip, Lily was happy that she would go home with her dad. The monster raised its paw and retreated. Dennis was free. The monster turned and walked away from the rescue group. The detective watched in horror as the wounds on the mutant's body instantly healed. The monster came to Mason's aid and crushed the twins with its clawed paws. The man was surprised where this big guy came from and why he was killing other mutants. The battle of huge, scary monsters continued. The detective did not wait for the result. He had to quickly leave the carriage. Mason urged the men, who were watching the fight with fascination, to run away as far as possible, without waiting for the end of the battle. Everyone rushed to the exit. Assistants supported Dennis from both sides, not understanding how he was able to survive the attack of the giant mutant. Only now did the men notice that the train was stopped. The carriage unexpectedly turned out to be the last one, and they flew into a snowdrift. The rescuers saw columns of smoke and a large glow of fire. Dennis was most worried about his family. The head of the family really wanted to hope that everything was okay with his wife and children. The jolt was strong. Many could not hold on and fell. Kate was worried about her eldest daughter, who was pregnant. Haley came to, her stomach didn't hurt, and she calmed her mother down. A familiar man approached the girls and called the rescuers, who were supposed to meet them. Kate's friend helped her get out of the carriage. He said that part of the train had derailed and flown into the abyss. Haley didn't want to leave without the twins. She was very worried about them after seeing mutants in the neighboring windows. The survivors went outside and tried to contact their relatives to tell them that they were safe. Rescue teams and soldiers have already cordoned off the crash site. An acquaintance promised Kate to look for the children and offered to follow him. A woman and a girl approached the people in uniform. She felt unwell and asked to call a doctor. The soldiers ordered not to move and to stand still. Rescuers activated the sensor and began scanning the approaching people. The indicators indicated that the virus had been detected and both passengers were infected. The commander gave the order to eliminate the infection, and shots rang out. People did not know what was happening. Realizing that the killed could become mutants, they were explained that soon all healthy people would be able to proceed to the safe zone. The man confidently led his companions to the cordon. Kate's friend showed the squad leader a special ID. Permission to exit was received. It was time to leave the terrible place. Suddenly, Haley refused to go. She realized that it was no coincidence that her mother's friend was on the same train with them. The girl firmly decided to stay and wait for her father, sister, and brother. Kate did not understand what was happening to her previously obedient daughter. She insisted that the girl follow her into the warmth, at least for the sake of the child. At the other end of the train, it was quite hot. The battle between the old man and the serpentine dragon continued. Bruce steadfastly repelled the attack. The monster turned out to be very strong. Bob's grandfather was able to deliver powerful blows using ancient techniques. The old man managed to wound the giant mutant several times. The guide's assistant did not understand how the ancient grandfather could resist the formidable monster with such strength. The grandson praised the abilities of his relative. Taylor lay exhausted, badly injured after the train car overturned. Helen supported the old man with enthusiastic cries. The main character was not behaving quite adequately. He kept waving his arms and saying that it was time to go home. The sister was afraid for her brother, thinking that he had gone crazy. The girl thought about the fact that Lucas's hair had also turned white from fear. The young man himself did not understand what was happening to him. In his head, there was only one thought about returning home. Lucas tried to think about how to help Bruce. He had the impression that the old man himself was capable of dealing with the mutant. The problem was that the formidable monster quickly regenerated. The main character realized that he needed to try to find the heart so that there was no possibility of recovery. He shouted to his grandfather to pierce the monster's chest. The old man was blind. He could not see where to strike. Bruce had no choice but to use the heavenly powers. The fighter asked his patrons for help. The old man was heard. A divine gaze was revealed to him. An all-seeing eye showed where the mutant's weak spot was. Bruce directed a volley of stones at the monster. Helen couldn't believe that everything that was happening was real. Bob explained that it was not magic, but a special energy that exists in every person's body. It seemed that the old man had changed all the laws of physics. The streams of fire and stones obeyed his will. Patrons helped Bruce. He used all his abilities. Bob's grandfather directed energy in which the monster was supposed to burn like a flame. Streams of fire surrounded the monster from all sides. The cluster of mutants was falling apart under the influence of an extraterrestrial force, destroying each of them. The main figure of the monster also could not withstand the powerful attack. Energy charges struck the very heart of the monster. After a few minutes, which seemed like an eternity to those present, the mutant disintegrated into numerous pieces. The twins couldn't believe their eyes. It was a real shock. People looked at the defeated monster with distrust. Bruce stood motionless. He had dealt with the terrible monster. The protagonist hoped that the old man had managed to hit the mutant's heart. Bob's grandfather continued to stand among the monster's body parts. Helen was the loudest in her joy at the victory. The grandson reflected on the fact that his relative had been accumulating energy for several decades for such a moment, but it was taking away all his vitality. Suddenly, crows appeared over the battlefield. The birds pecked at the remains of the mutant, and the main character noticed something unusual. Lucas thought that these birds appeared too quickly, and besides, they usually do not feed on carrion. The young man watched in horror as the monster's body began to recover again. It seemed as if each piece had become a separate mutant. They were beauties, with burning eyes and long black hair. Helen was also shocked by the transformation that was taking place. The number of mutants with sexual forms increased with every second. Bob and his companion were not prepared for this turn of events, and were already preparing to run. Diana and her friends did not know whose corpses were lying in large numbers near the tower. The girl heard sounds from the car. She hoped that there was a connection there to call rescuers. Henry also thought about asking for help and headed towards the van. Lily complained to her older friend that she had a fever and was hungry. Suddenly, fog began to descend upon the travelers. The friends instantly lost sight of where they were going. They all had to stick together to avoid getting lost. Suddenly, the old woman thought she saw her grandson, and she rushed to the side. Diana tried to stop her sick grandmother and ran after her, leaving the frightened boy alone. The girl did not see anything around. Even the tracks disappeared. The beauty realized that she was lost. She did not know where to go. Suddenly, Diana caught on something and fell. The girl felt someone moving behind her. The mutants that suddenly appeared quickly surrounded the beauty from all sides. The werewolves were happy with the fresh prey. They were hungry. With his new abilities, Bruce could see seductive bodies that were very close. The old man dreamed that his sight would return to him. He could not believe that such beauties posed a danger. The mutated girls quickly rebuilt their flawless bodies. The monsters were not quite similar to each other. They were of different ages, and soon they began to surround the small detachment of people. One of the werewolves came very close to Bruce, about to touch him. The elder realized that he was in trouble and tried again to turn to the heavenly powers for help. However, the old man did not have time to defend himself. The mutant attacked first. Bruce's legs gave out and he fell into the snow. Helen and Lucas watched in horror as it happened. No one expected the attack. The young guide barely held back the boy, who wanted to run to help his grandfather. Bruce couldn't move and only felt the presence of the stranger. Diana tried not to breathe so as not to attract the attention of the werewolves. The girl completely forgot that Lily was with her, sleeping behind her. The mutants immediately smelled the food and began to attack the beauty in a crowd. Suddenly, the axe cut through the monster's head. The dismembered mutants fell one after another. Henry swung the piercing weapon deftly. It was time to run before the next batch of monsters appeared. The companions ran away from their pursuers at full speed. After some time, Diana and Henry managed to escape the pursuit. The girl thanked the savior. He usually hid from mutants all the time. He would have been dead long ago if Lucas had not helped him earlier. The fugitives were delighted. The car was already very close. There was only a little bit left to go to try to call for help. The old woman sat near the van and scolded her grandson for deciding to play hide and seek with her. Diana was very happy about the meeting. She no longer hoped to find her grandmother. The beauty calmed the sick woman and again promised to find the child. Sounds like bells were coming from the car. Henry used an axe to cut the chain to get inside the trailer. The doors opened slightly and the young man looked inside. The calls came from a stranger sitting with his back to the exit. Diana felt that the man looked strange, but she turned to him for help. It was quiet for a while. The man was silent. When the stranger looked back, everyone saw a mutant with horror. The werewolf stood up and was about to get out of the trailer. He needed to run again. The most terrible thing was that the monster had a machine gun in his hands. The friends didn't have time to take a few steps when the bullet pierced Henry's body. The guy, with the last of his strength, reached the mutant under heavy fire. He didn't want him to be able to kill anyone else. Diana watched in horror as the young man died before her eyes. Soon the fight was over. The werewolf was dead. It became quiet. Smoke from gunpowder gases poured out of the van. The main character realized that he needed to save the old man, and at the last moment, with a punch, he killed the mutant, who was ready to swallow the victim. Lucas decided to help the helpless Bruce, who did not have time to recover his strength after a difficult fight. Now the only hope was in the young man who was supposed to protect his sister and her companions. The young man did not understand how to defeat numerous enemies. The rest rushed to help Grandpa Bob. The grandson cried from helplessness. The old man's legs did not move. The main character was expecting an attack and only hoped that his body would not fail him. The girls were plotting something. Lucas watched what was happening carefully. The young man could not imagine what these mutants were capable of. The werewolves were dancing some strange dance, preparing to attack. The monsters surrounded the young man from all sides. There was a strange sound, as if on command, all the mutants pounced on the main character. Lucas felt sad that he couldn't use his power at all. The young man had the impression that the werewolves were sucking the energy out of his body. Several jaws from different sides sank into the guy's body, and he screamed in pain. Helen watched in horror as her brother died. The mutants surrounded Lucas from all sides and did not allow him to move. The werewolf's body remained lying in the trailer. Diana took Henry out of the van and laid him on the ground. The girl reassured her friend that everything would soon be over and they would be able to go home. The old woman tried to cover the wounds with her hands, but the blood continued to flow. Luckily, the baby was sleeping and didn't see what happened. The guy turned out to be very young, despite the fact that he looked mature. He said that he was returning from work to his sick mother. His boss did not even pay money for the work. Henry was delirious. He saw his older sister who was meeting him at his home. The recovered mother cooked dumplings for her dear son. Everyone was happy. The young man always believed that he would be rewarded for his hard work and that good luck would await him in life. Hope never left him. The girl and her grandmother cried as they listened to Henry's final confession, as he simply wanted to live. A minute later, the young man stopped breathing. Diana covered his face. The mutants were already approaching the car. They heard voices and smelled food. The girl said goodbye to the guy who acted like a hero. The beauty no longer thought about suicide. She was ready to live on and fight to the last. She gathered her hair and resolutely took the axe in her hands. Diana was ready to fight to protect the weak. The mutants continued to torture the first victim. Helen picked up the guitar. She couldn't allow anyone to bully her little brother. The sister drove away the monsters using a musical instrument as a weapon. The young men looked at the brave girl who was not afraid to enter the crowd of werewolves. The main character watched as Helen once again protected him from enemies, just like she did in childhood. The girl did not spare her guitar, which was the most precious thing to her. The blows rained down one after another. The mutants fell and retreated. Having dispersed almost everyone and thrown away the already completely broken instrument, the sister ran to her brother. Lucas watched as tears poured from the girl's eyes. Helen tried to lift her exhausted brother, but did not see that one of the mutants had crept up on her from behind. The monster pierced both of the girl's hands with sharp tentacles. The main character could not move to help his sister. The werewolves went on the attack again. Now they had no one to fear. The twins lay in the snow, hugging each other, bleeding, and the monsters prepared for a feast. The young man lay in the snow and couldn't even move. Monstrous tentacles dug into Lucas's body. He understood that this was the end. Bob and the guide didn't know what to do. There was no one else to protect them. As he said goodbye, the brother hugged his sister, who, together with her older sister, always protected him from others. Lucas remembered his recent childhood. At home, the twins often fought with each other, but he loved Helen very much. Visits to grandparents have always been a holiday for the large family. At this time, the cells of the protagonist's body continued to restructure. New molecules formed a chain. The young man felt that something was happening to him. A huge column of snow rose up from the very spot where the wounded twins lay. In the snowstorm, the mutants flew apart. The storm died down as quickly as it had come, leaving a completely different Lucas standing in the middle of the field. Bob looked at the streams of snow bursting out of the ground and felt an energy that was much more powerful than what his grandfather had possessed. However, the monsters were not going to give up and prepared to attack again. Feathers began to swirl above the protagonist's head, and 2 giant wings appeared right behind his back. Old Bruce couldn't believe it. He felt the power of a monster, which he had been striving for all his life, but was never able to reach the highest level. Many have dreamed of achieving immortality since ancient times, but only a few managed to cultivate special energy and become eternal. This took decades and required special elixirs. For some unknown reason, the main character managed to do this without much effort. The mutants disappeared into the fiery lava that Lucas sent. The monsters' bodies crumbled, releasing the souls of the captured people. As she disappeared, the beauty who was the heart of the monster thanked the young man for saving her. Helen watched in amazement as her little brother changed. When the werewolves disappeared, the protagonist hurried to his sister. Lucas hugged the crying girl and promised to buy her a new guitar. The twins hugged each other tightly, not believing that they were alive. All that was left was to find their relatives. They still didn't know what awaited them ahead,